9 minutes and 31 seconds. Manic Monday, May 25, 2020. Looked like just another ordinary Monday in Minneapolis. When George Perry Floyd Jr. woke up that morning, he had plans for the day. Look for some work, hang out with friends, maybe call his daughter Gianna that evening to chat. 40-6-year-old George had moved from Houston to Minneapolis a few years back. The COVID-19 pandemic had cost him his job. The El Nubo Rodeo Club where he worked as a bouncer had shut down. Now he could only find occasional work as a security guard. But life was tough. George's past hadn't been easy. He'd struggled with drug addiction, spent time in prison, but in recent years he'd been trying to turn his life around. He helped young people through a mentorship program. This big guy, known as Big Floyd, was actually soft-hearted. That afternoon, George went to Cup Foods with his friend Maurice Hall. Cup Foods was a local store that everyone in the neighborhood knew. When George paid for cigarettes, the cashier looked suspiciously at the $20 bill George handed him. "This money looks fake," said the young cashier, Christopher Martin. George was surprised. "What do you mean, fake? I didn't know that." Christopher called over his manager, Mahmoud Abu Mayaleh. The store policy was clear. Call the police on customers who used counterfeit money. Mahmoud had to follow that policy. At 8:01 p.m., they called 911. The call 911. "What's your emergency?" "Hi, I'm calling from Cup Foods. Someone tried to use fake money." "Okay, is the person still there?" "Yeah, he's sitting outside in his car. He looks drunk." This phone call would set off a chain of events. The code sent to the Minneapolis Police Department. Forgery in progress. George was sitting outside Cup Foods in his blue Mercedes SUV with his friends Maurice Hall and Shawanda Hill. They didn't know George's money was fake either. George looked nervous, but he had no idea what was about to happen to him. When the first police cars arrived, George's heart started racing. His past experiences with cops made him anxious. First Contact Thomas Lane and J. Alexander Kuhn were the first officers to arrive on scene. Both were relatively new cops. Lane had 9 months' experience. Kuhn had 15 months. They worked under Derek Chauvin's supervision. As Lane approached George's car, he drew his weapon. Was this standard procedure? For George, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would never end. "Put your hands on the steering wheel," Lane shouted. George gripped the steering wheel tightly with his big hands. His voice was shaking. "Please don't shoot me. I've been shot before." These words showed just how scared George was of the police. He'd been hurt during police stops in 2019. When the order came to get out of the car, George resisted. Well, not exactly resisted, he was scared. He suffered from claustrophobia, fear of enclosed spaces. Getting into a police car was pure torture for him. "I'm claustrophobic, please don't put me in the car." But the officers didn't take his pleas seriously. Derek Chauvin arrives. Derek Michael Chauvin was a veteran with 19 years of experience at the Minneapolis Police Department. 44 years old, he had a cold and distant personality. He had 18 complaints in his record, but had only received disciplinary action for 2 of them. When Chauvin arrived on scene, he tried to take control of the situation. George's resistance to getting in the police car annoyed him. "Get him in the car." George was lying on the ground, hands cuffed, constantly pleading, "I can't breathe." These words would become the most painful reminder in American policing history, since Eric Garner Chauvin placed his knee on George's neck. At first, it looked like an intervention technique, but as the minutes passed, it was clear the situation had gone way beyond normal. The witness, Darnella Frazier, was only 17 years old, walking to Cup Foods with her little cousin. The scene she saw on the street corner froze her in place. A police officer had his knee on a black man's neck, and the man was begging, "I can't breathe." Darnella pulled out her phone and started recording. This decision would change history. Aisha Arden, Kaylin Gilbert, Alyssa Fnari, Donald Williams too. They all stood there, witnessing George's suffering. Some were recording, some were telling the cops to stop the intervention. "He's not responsive," shouted Donald Williams, a man with mixed martial arts background. He recognized the technique Chauvin was using, a blood choke. But Chauvin ignored the witnesses' protests. 9 minutes and 31 seconds from 8:19 p.m. to 8 hours, 28 minutes and 29 seconds p.m. Exactly 9 minutes and 31 seconds, Derek Chauvin kept his knee on George Floyd's neck. What happened during this time? First 3 minutes, George keeps saying, "I can't breathe," begging for help. Chauvin increases the pressure of his knee. 4th and 5th minutes, George's voice gets weaker. He moans, "Mama, ... He's calling for his mother. 6th minute. George says, "Please, I can't breathe," one last time. Then his voice stops. 7th and 8th minutes. George is no longer moving. Witnesses are shouting, "You're killing him." 9th minute. The ambulance has arrived. George is motionless, but Chauvin still keeps his knee on George's neck. Thomas Lane asks at one point, "Should we roll him over?" Chauvin responds, "No, keep him in this position." Silence George Floyd's last words. "I can't breathe, ... please, ... mama." Then silence. When the paramedics arrived, they couldn't find George's pulse. He was taken to Hennepin County Medical Center, but it was too late. At 9:25 p.m., George Perry Floyd Jr. was pronounced dead. The video goes viral. The video Darnella Frazier shot started spreading on social media that night. The 9-minute 31-second video showed a murder in front of the world's eyes. The #GeorgeFloyd hashtag became trending. The video was watched millions of times. People were shocked. How could this happen in the 21st century, where everyone could see it? Protests started in Minneapolis. What began as peaceful demonstrations turned violent late at night. The 3rd Precinct police station was set on fire. The country in flames. George Floyd's death didn't stay just in Minneapolis. It spread across all of America, then to the world. In New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, D.C., protests started everywhere. The Black Lives Matter movement experienced the largest mobilization in its history. But some of the protests turned into looting and violence. In Minneapolis, more than 700 buildings were damaged. Economic losses reached $500 million. Donald Trump was president at the time. He wrote on social media, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." The arrests on May 28, Derek Chauvin was arrested. The initial charges, 3rd-degree murder and 2nd-degree manslaughter. Then came the others, Thomas Lane, J. Alexander Kung, to Thou. All were charged with aiding and abetting. Chauvin's arrest calmed the protests somewhat. But people wanted real justice. The trial process on March 8, 2021, Derek Chauvin's trial began. At Hennepin County Courthouse, presided over by Judge Peter Cahill. Prosecutor Matthew Frank said in his opening statement, "This case is about 9 minutes and 31 seconds. During that time, Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd." Defense attorney Eric Nielsen told a different story. George Floyd died from a drug overdose. Derek Chauvin was just doing his job. The witnesses throughout the trial, dozens of witnesses testified. Frazier described what she experienced that day. "If I hadn't had my phone, George Floyd's story wouldn't be known." Donald Williams, too, explained the technique Chauvin used. This is a blood choke. It can kill someone. Christopher Martin, the Cup Foods cashier, remembered that day. I wish I hadn't called the police. Charles McMillian, a 61-year-old neighborhood resident, tearfully recounted, I told George not to resist the police. But he wasn't resisting anyway. The most painful testimony came from George's daughter Gianna. The 6-year-old girl saw her father in the video. My daddy is going to change the world. Medical evidence. Martin Tobin, a respiratory specialist, explained to the jury how George was deprived of oxygen. Mr. Floyd couldn't breathe for exactly 4 minutes and 51 seconds. That's enough time to kill the brain. Dr. Andrew Baker, Hennepin County Medical Examiner, presented the autopsy report. Cause of death, asphyxia due to neck compression during police custody. The defense emphasized the fentanyl and methamphetamine found in George's body, but experts stated these substances weren't at lethal levels. Video analysis in court. That horrific video was watched over and over again. Jury members saw George's final moments second by second. The FBI video analyst calculated that Chauvin applied weight to George's neck for exactly 4 minutes and 45 seconds. George Floyd stopped moving at 4:51, but Derek Chauvin kept his knee on his neck for 3:27 more. The verdict April 20, 2021, Tuesday. The jury reached its decision after just 10 hours of deliberation. Count 1, second degree. Unintentional murder, GUILTY. Count 2, third-degree murder, GUILTY. Count 3, second-degree manslaughter, GUILTY. When the verdict was read, there was deep silence in the courtroom. Derek Chauvin showed no reaction. But in the streets of Minneapolis, cheers of joy rose up. Justice, justice. The sentence on June 25, 2021. Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22.5 years in prison. Judge Peter Scahill said while sentencing, "This case has brought great pain to Minneapolis, to Minnesota, to our country, and to the world. But this pain can be an opportunity for change." Chauvin's defense attorney announced they would file an appeal. The other officers, in February 2022. The other 3 officers were also tried. Thomas Lane, 2.5 years in prison. J. Alexander Kung, 3 years in prison. 2. Thou, 3.5 years in prison. All were also found guilty in federal court for violating civil rights. George's legacy. George Floyd's death became one of the turning points in American history. His name became a symbol of the police reform movement. George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Police reform legislation discussed in Congress. Defund the police movement to reduce police budgets. Chauvin trial effect. Increased awareness against police violence. The city of Minneapolis paid the Floyd family $27 million in compensation. Social change. George Floyd's death didn't just have legal consequences, it also triggered social change. Law enforcement reforms. Many states restructured police training. Corporate changes. Companies launched anti-racism programs. Educational reforms. Schools added racial justice topics to their curricula. Cultural change. George Floyd's story was told in art, music, and literature. 9 minutes and 31 seconds. George Perry Floyd Jr. was an ordinary American who grew up in Houston's 3rd Ward, played football, and made rap music. He wasn't perfect, he had mistakes, he had struggles. But on May 25, 2020, in Minneapolis, at the corner of 38th Street and Chicago Avenue, something extraordinary happened with George Floyd. His death mobilized millions. The 9 minutes and 31 seconds under Derek Chauvin's knee caused America to examine its soul. Police violence, racial injustice, systemic racism, all began to be discussed. Georgia's last words, "I can't breathe," expressed not just physical breathlessness, but the feeling of suffocation that Black America had experienced for centuries. Today, at George Floyd Square, the scene of the incident, there's a memorial. People leave flowers, pray, and promise to keep fighting for justice. George Floyd's story is a tragedy, but it's also proof that change is possible. 9 minutes and 31 seconds ended one life, but it also changed millions of lives. "I can't breathe" is no longer just George Floyd's voice. It's America's voice of conscience.